Hello, everyone. My name is Leanne Coves, and I will be your moderator for today. And welcome to Rapid Fire Session A6, More Than Pots and Pans, Supporting Staff and Provider Wellness. And I think we're starting to see that theme throughout the last day and going into the next 2 days. So my role here today is to keep us on time and to make sure that we get a chance to hear from each of our three wonderful speakers with great presentations. So we would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. So we're really blessed to have everybody here today. And again, we have three great presentations. They will each be able to introduce themselves and their projects. So with no further ado, I'd like to pass it on to our first set of speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. I'm Tom Rapanakis. I'm the VP of the Physician Health Programme in BC, and I'm here today with my colleague Felicia Phan, who is our Physician Health and Wellness Liaison. And we're speaking today very briefly about the implementation or the building of a provincial peer support initiative. Now, I have nothing to disclose other than the fact that I work for Doctors of BC.
And same with me, I work at Doctors of BC, the Physician Health Program, and my role has been funded by the Canadian Medical Association, Scotiabank, and MD Financial Management. And then to mitigating our potential bias, we won't be talking about any products or medications, and if there are relationships, we will be acknowledging them.
So today we're going to be trying to cover or developing an understanding of the impact of peer support on physician wellness and by extension on patient care. We'll be looking at the key components of implementing local peer support programs as part of a wider provincial initiative, which is what we're in the middle of doing at the moment. And we'll discuss the potential successes and challenges that surround that type of a project. Now, in 2021, the BC PHP experienced a massive increase in demand for its services, and in turn a huge increase in the amount of support that we were providing. It was in fact a 93% increase on the support that was provided in similar fashion in 2019. So this quite fundamentally indicated to us that there's a strong need for extra support around physician health and wellness. In 2021, fairly early on, we conducted a consultation, and 75% of the divisions and MSAs that responded to us as part of that consultation indicated a strong will to collaborate with the PHP in the field of peer support. They also indicated a strong willingness to engage with us in delivering this peer support in a hybrid delivery model. So we'll give a bit more detail around that as we go forward. We also found through that consultation that there were several peer support programs already in development around the province, and so the model that we've come up with and that we're trying to implement takes all of these things into account. So we're not trying to step on any of the toes of the existing peer support programs. We'd like to involve them in this initiative. Now, studies have shown that peer support can be incredibly helpful to those who access it. It can contribute to a more supportive culture where physicians are more effective in offering help as well as reaching out and seeking it. It can lead to reduced levels of isolation, and there's evidence that it shows improved coping and self-management skills among those who access it as well. So the model that we came up with is that we're aiming to facilitate confidential, non-clinical, organised peer support opportunities for physicians around BC. Now these would be part of locally managed peer support programs. So when I say locally managed, I mean that the programs at the local level will be in charge of recruiting their peer supporters, making the matches between the people who need support and those physicians who are providing it. And they'll also be keeping records locally, for example, of the conversations that take place, and there'll be some evaluation going on at that local level as well. So then the PHP at the provincial level will provide training. So that involves seeking a training vendor, which we've done, and that will be Dr. Joe Shapiro, who's quite a renowned provider of peer support training across Canada and the US. And we will, now that we've found that training vendor, we'll organise the delivery of that training to the peer supporters in collaboration with the local programmes. We also hope to provide opportunities for those local programmes to stay connected to each other, to share information about the challenges that they face in providing that peer support, perhaps also to provide a forum for the people that are providing the peer support, the actual peer supporters, to speak to each other and to discuss, again, challenges, but ideas around best practice. We're still defining that, and it depends a bit on the size of the sites that we end up working with. Obviously, if there's a large site with many peer supporters, that's something that could be quite appropriately managed at a local level as well. Smaller sites with not so many peer supporters, we might have to provide some extra support there. So I guess one thing to mention here is that an overall objective of this initiative is equity. So as I mentioned, we're aware of some peer support programs that already exist, and that's fantastic. We'd like them to be part of the conversation and the knowledge sharing side of this initiative. But we can help those sites that perhaps don't have the resources yet, don't have the funding, or for whatever reason they don't have they haven't had the chance to start their own program. We can support those sites. So the idea is that there's more of a level playing field around the province of support that's available to physicians. I'm just going to speak very briefly to exactly what I mean by peer support. The PHP provides what we call clinical peer support. So the interactions are often very long. We have our own team of program physicians. They can be quite intensive. We can speak to people's other clinical stakeholders, so we can speak to someone's GP or psychiatrist. We can really get into the weeds of organising the care that those people receive. That's not the type of level of peer support that we're talking about here. So this is non-clinical. So as part of this initiative, we're talking about non-clinical, emotionally supportive conversations between colleagues. They're likely to be one-off interactions. And then if something more intensive is required, then the PHP is there for that upward referral.
Great, thanks, Tom. So for this next part, I'm going to be reviewing how our program is organized. So we have the Physician Wellness Advisory Group, which acts as our governing body, and it's composed of representatives from the Physician Health Program as well as the Joint Collaborative Committees who are co-funding our program, and they are a partnership between the Doctors of BC and the Ministry of Health. And this group is responsible for program governance, making sure that we have available resources, as well as key program decisions. And then to the left, we have the PHP implementation team, and this team is responsible for organizing that training, facilitating those collaboration opportunities between the different sites, preparing templates and toolkits, as well as doing inter-site matching, because we recognize that even though some physicians want that local feeling of a peer support, there are physicians who want some anonymity. So we want to facilitate those matches in areas. So if someone asks for some support in Vancouver, we can match them with someone in the north, for example, to facilitate that. And then we also recognize, like we said, there are existing peer support programs. So we aren't providing direct funding to them. So they're not accountable to the advisory group, but they are loosely involved in that they can participate in inter-site matching, and they can participate in our collaboration opportunities, so we can work slowly towards a place of provincial coordination. And then there are our prototype sites that don't have existing programs, that are in charge of developing their own program and adapting their program to their local physician needs. So next I'm going to talk about a little bit about, if you're interested in starting your own peer support program. We haven't selected our prototype sites yet, but this is the general process that we're going to recommend when they do start. So the first is it's important to assess need. How do physicians want to reach out to the program? In what ways do they feel comfortable? Do they want to talk to a person, or do they want to use a survey, for example, or some sort of intake form? It's also important to engage leadership, because by having a strong leadership, that's going to facilitate a culture where physicians do feel comfortable reaching out. And then also sourcing those resources. And we've set aside some funding so that these programs can start up and get started. And then there's the preparation part, which is about recruiting and training those peer supporters, developing those resources and processes for intake and matching, and then also having those collaborative opportunities. So we're going to match some of those early prototype sites with those existing programs so we can all learn from each other. And then finally, there's the execution phase where we can actually start making those matches, delivering peer support, and then also measuring the process and monitoring the program as it's being implemented so we can share those successes. So we're hoping to measure program uptake, satisfaction, potentially using the Mayo Clinic Physician Wellbeing Index as a pre- and post-test measure to assess how it's impacting physician health and well-being. And in terms of potential strengths and challenges, I particularly want to highlight that what we see as a strength is a balance between allowing for the flexibility of local adaptation, but then also having some sort of provincial body so we can have some provincial coordination so that we're not all working in silos and we can all learn from each other. So that balance. And then hopefully the goal is to support a culture of caring where physicians are taking care of each other. In terms of challenges, there is a potential for the lack of awareness and uptake of the resources. There is still a lot of stigma around mental health and reaching out. So there still might be that lack of awareness. There might be a lack of funding or resources compared to what we planned. And then also there might be a lack of peer supporters reaching out because we do recognize that physicians are burned out. And this is another thing that we would be adding to their plate. So I'm going to very quickly go over where we're at. So in 2021, we did that consultation that Tom mentioned. We secured the program governance. Right now, we're in the process of selecting our 5 to 6 prototype sites. And then over the summer, we're going to be helping to recruit peer supporters and training them and setting up the program so we can launch in the fall. And then between the fall and winter, really work on implementing the program, monitoring, PDSAing, so we can learn and then recruit the next cohort in 2023. So I have some discussion questions that I can come back to in case there aren't that many questions, because we'd love to hear feedback from you on different things about how to incorporate, like what your thoughts are on how to embed peer support into your workplace. Potentially hear about personal experiences of peer support, how that's impacted you. And even though our program is about physicians, we recognize that there are non-physicians in this group, but peer support I think applies to any profession. So we can come back to that. But we did want to say that if you are interested in talking to us, you can email us at programs@physicianhealth.com. And we did want to thank our funders for making this program possible. Thanks.
I think I need a microphone.
My question is, do you feel that part of the reason for the peer support is... Sorry, may I interrupt?
You have to use the microphone for the web stream.
All right, I'll use the microphone.
Do you feel that part of the reason for physicians needing that peer support is the lack of physicians right now? And with the lack of physicians, how is this going to make it better?
I mean, I think that's a great question. Thank you. It's difficult to answer definitively. I mean, I certainly think it could be a factor. What I would say is that I think this type of supportive culture and having peer support available and accessible is actually just part of a healthy workplace, regardless. So actually, I don't dismiss the importance of the premise of the question. I think that's absolutely right. But the reason I say that is I came to Canada about 18 months ago to BC. Before that, I was running a nationwide peer support service across the UK for some 12 years for the British Medical Association and saw huge benefits there as well. So I think it's something that is valuable and should be in place anyway. I think these support structures should be there for physicians. So the second part of your question, I've just forgotten.
Is the shortage of physicians part of the reason that physicians are needing more peer support?
Oh yeah, and then you also mentioned that how will this work, bearing in mind the fact that there is a shortage of physicians?
Yeah, with the shortage of physicians, how is it going to help to have the peer support for the physicians?
Well, I think you need to have healthy workplaces, really, for physicians to function well. And in my experience, having good quality support available, including peer support, enhances people's experience of work, their ability to function well. My opinion is that it doesn't exacerbate the problem, it improves it. I would say that participation in programs like these is also completely voluntary. So we're only working with sites who come forward and express an interest to collaborate with us. And that feeds right down to the recruitment of the peer supporters themselves. So no one's going to be forced to provide this or to give their time. And we're really careful about the commitment that we're asking for. So for a peer supporter, it's likely that you might be having perhaps a conversation with someone a month. I think it's a really important point, and you're absolutely right to raise it.
Yeah, but when you have a pandemic like COVID, it's really hard for, I think, anybody to function in, to want the peer support because you're so stressed and you want it, but it's trying to get it, and you run into these circles, and then you get the shortages of physicians. And anyways, thank you.
No problem.
Another question? One more? Right here.
I'm curious, you had on your kind of flow chart for the timeline a piece about peer support training, and I'm curious about whether that's going to be a formal kind of training program. Are there going to be subject matter experts that are kind of, helping to evaluate people's readiness to be a peer supporter, or is it just going to be some resources and send you on your way?
Yeah, I can answer that. So we're having formal peer support training. So we've contracted Dr. Joe Shapiro, who is a expert physician peer support trainer from Harvard, and she'll be providing a 4-hour formal training. And it's going to be she's going to be doing role plays and getting people to practice. And she's going to role play stuff so that people can watch her do the peer support interaction. And then follow that, we'll also have training from our physician health program, so people have an understanding of the different physician health resources. Because at the end of the day, the peer supporters are not providing that clinical support. So when they approach a situation where a physician might have a substance use issue, suicidality, something like that, then they know how to do a warm transfer to the physician health program, so we can provide that continuing care.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one short question. Anyone else?
You mentioned you're going to be doing looking for test sites. Are you going to pick any rural communities?
We would like to, yes. So we were looking for 5 to 6 prototype sites, and we actually received over 20 applications, which is fantastic. And one of the most important dimensions that we'll be looking at is diversity. So we would very much like to have a cross section of sites. I mean, the diversity can, as you quite rightly point out, include a balance of metropolitan and rural. Obviously, we'd like to have a diversity across primary care, specialists, and perhaps even around the way that the programs are geographically arranged as well. So there might be an opportunity, for example, for us to work with public health physicians in providing a program which is kind of province-wide, as well as just programs that are at hospitals or clinics.
Because the small rural clinics are desperate for help too. So
Yes.
To include those would be really, really paramount to the communities. Well, thank you.
And thank you so much for sharing. The last slide. Can you just get the last slide up for just a moment while our other presenters are coming up? So our next one is on disability management before the disability. So we'll welcome Katrina to the podium.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to put it out there that I'm like crazy nervous. So at some point, my Garmin alarm is going to go off and give us a heart rate alarm. So I'll just put that out there. Good morning, all you beautiful and wonderful people. I'm Katrina. I'm a paramedic and I'm a mental health clinician. And I absolutely consider it a privilege to support the public and my healthcare colleagues. I'm also kind of obsessed with this idea of failure demand. Failure demand is the idea that failure to intervene on one front causes an increase in a demand somewhere else. And then about a year ago, I found myself dropped into this brand new world to me of disability management, where I was given the mandate to decrease psychological disability in paramedics. And I thought, well, we're gonna have to start long before people get to this department with making changes. So while I frame this presentation for paramedics, I want everybody to keep in mind that all of these ideas can be adapted to different environments, different clinicians, and different departments that we have within the healthcare system. Is it just... So one disclosure, I do have a small consulting practice that I run, and I feel that it didn't impact the development of this content, and I did seek consultation from third-party people. Whew, jitters. It's the after COVID, right? I've been doing this over Zoom and just looking at video screens, but I love the energy and I love the vibe, so thank you. So the ideas that I'm going to present here aren't about one thing. These ideas reflect an ecosystem of things and people, so we need to consider them across multiple dimensions. And these aren't meant to be quick fixes. There might be some things that we can implement and they can happen very quickly and we can get some results very quickly. But really, when I thought of these ideas, I was looking at the big picture and I'm thinking of the long game. Without thinking about where we're going to go and how these things might look like further down the road, they're not going to have the same impact they could. And we don't just want to look at an organization that someone works in. We want to look at all the places that these people, these professionals have connections. So whether it's in that organization, whether it's with all the other professions they might touch or communicate with, it's looking at the patients, it's looking at the colleges. There's so many places that all our professionals, and our paramedics included, just interact with other people in other systems. So we need to think of that. And if I was to give one thought that I want you to take away as far as the disability management component, disability management does not have to wait for the disability to happen. We can be proactive about this, and that will save us from that failure demand idea. Come on. So for the purpose of this presentation, I divided it up into 3 targets. We're going to talk about the paramedic leadership and how we can make intervention there. We're going to talk about the public and other professionals and how we can have interventions there. And then we're also going to talk about the paramedics themselves and the things that we can do in that area. I'm old school with my paper notes. So with the paramedic leadership, we want to think of education as an intervention. We need to educate the people who are leading paramedics so that we can create a culture shift. This is long game. This is not stuff you're going to fix overnight. And one of the biggest shifts that we need to normalize is this idea that leaders are support people. And when you are helping to lead humans, you are going to have humans come to you with human problems. So to have this idea that you're not just referring them to the other department that deals with this stuff, you are the person who's on the front line of helping this person negotiate what they might be going through. This doesn't mean that we expect all leaders to be counselors, but we do expect them to have a knowledge of where they're referring their staff to and some of the supports that they can access. And then also being willing to listen and validate and acknowledge what somebody might be going through. We need to value those soft skills that we want leaders to have so that we can have a healthier front line. Part of this is really bringing awareness to leaders about the language they use, because anybody can hear things at any time. So when we're stigmatizing the reason somebody might need to take some time off for their mental wellness or to help them cope, we need to make sure we're not talking about that in a negative context, or we're accusing staff of making up excuses just to get something they want. Those are really toxic thoughts. They're still pervasive as much as we talk about wellness. So that's the type of stuff we want to bring awareness to when we're talking to leaders. And this has kind of been brought up a little bit so far in the conference, but really this like leaning into the conversations. You are the person who's there for whoever's confronting you, and it's a privilege. If somebody comes to you for guidance, we need to start empowering leaders to think that those people are relying on you and they're looking up to you, and that's a privileged position to be in. Put a little bit of a spin on it. So I would like to say that I think paramedicine and the work paramedics do is often misunderstood. It's one of those professions that the media loves to glob onto. Lots of movies have their spin on it. But it doesn't necessarily represent the actual stresses that paramedics face every day. So it's really important to get information out there to the public, to the people who are thinking of becoming paramedics, to the other professionals that engage with paramedics day to day. We want to get the word out about what the job actually is and what their days might look like. When we create better understanding among others, it helps everybody to have healthier expectations, including paramedics of themselves. I know I don't want to go to work and continually feel like I'm not living up to the expectations that everybody has of me. So if we can get realistic expectations out there, we create a safer environment. I want to mention briefly too that I think it's really important in the recruiting process that we let people know what they are signing up for. It's okay to talk about the risks that come with being a paramedic, but people need to be aware that that is what they're signing up for. If we scare people away, that's because maybe that's not right for them. So if we can get that out there, that's a really important piece than somebody ending up there and then feeling like they don't know what to do. So with the paramedics, I have two things I want to discuss. This first one is mental health check-ins. So we've designed this as an intervention. This is actually something I'm currently rolling out with the Disability Management Department for PHSA for the paramedics. And it's basically a conversation that's meant to be strengths-based, one-to-one conversation with somebody from the Disability Management Department who has some additional training. And it's about tapping into paramedics and asking them to reflect on what they know about themselves. And it's so that they know things about themselves, so when they aren't coping well, they've already tuned into it. They don't know, they're already prepared. If they notice they're not doing something they usually would to cope, that can be a little light bulb for them that, you know what, I'm not coping well. Maybe I should engage the coping strategies that I've thought of before this moment. So these conversations are meant to be non-clinical, they're strengths-based, and they're based on the principles of self-efficacy, where we hope to empower people to do a tough job well, which we know boosts resilience. And we know that paramedics are always asked to prepare for this what if. If this happens, what will you do? We're just asking them to do the same thing for themselves. If this happens, how will you know that you're not doing well, and what plan do you have in place to cope with it? So this next dimension that I've developed for the paramedics is this idea that if we boost their skill set in helping other people deal with mental health illness, that it will have a trickle-down effect. Paramedics are healthcare providers, and realistically, like a lot of healthcare providers, they don't get a lot of training in how to deal with mental health emergencies or mental health crises. So if we increase the training that paramedics receive about how to deal with mental illness and psychological crises, it helps to legitimize those concerns of elements of health and healthcare. It reduces the stigma of mental health concerns being separate from regular healthcare. The trickle-down is not only better care for patients, but paramedics are more likely to recognize mental illness concerns sooner in themselves and maybe even in those around them. And not only that, they'll be better prepared to at least have those rudimentary conversations about where do we go from here, or maybe I can just listen. The whole idea is to normalize it, remind them they're human and they can have the same problems other humans do, but we're also integrating it into their professional practice as a legitimate skill that almost any healthcare provider should have. All right. I have like no idea about my timing, but I'm more than happy to answer questions. I do have, I was prepared with some of the questions as far as those one-on-one mental health check-ins that we're doing, so I'm willing to entertain questions about any of the initiatives. I just wanted to make sure I got the rudimentary stuff in.
Thank you, Katrina, for your presentation. That was awesome.
Thank you.
I had a question because when you talked about the leadership part, which was your first kind of goal that you guys were looking at, it was definitely something that triggered with me because I remember moving into nursing leadership and not realizing I was supposed to be a counselor and being like, oh, how do I learn this?
Yeah.
And so I'm curious to know a little bit more about what that looks like. If you guys have thought about that a little bit more, how to make those soft skills more routine in leadership.
Yeah, I think it needs to be integrated into, the training and the orientation process, and it's normalizing it as far as like, it is a privilege to be a leader. You have people who count on you. So again, it's that culture shift stuff. If there's one thing that stands out for me as really important to teach leaders so that they can deal with it, it's the boundary stuff, right? So being okay with saying what you can do for somebody and what you can't do for somebody. It's okay to say, I don't know how to do this, but let me help you find somebody who can. I think too many times the leaders get overwhelmed with this idea of thinking they have to know all the answers, but there can be so much power in just saying like, I don't know how to do that, but like, let me make a phone call. And in those situations, knowing how to say, to still budget your time. You know what, I can't handle this right now. What can we do in the interim? Or to set boundaries with like, yeah, I have some time for you, but can we make this a 20-minute conversation? And, if we need more time later, we'll see what happens. So that would be my biggest thing, is teaching how to have boundaries as far as being a leader. And boundaries shift on any given day, right? Like what we can tolerate and what we can handle. So that would be one place I would start as far as like having communication skills, and that's going to include boundaries for those tough conversations.
Katrina, thanks for your presentation. I'm a family physician, and when we have people who deal with frontline issues and struggles and stresses, and they develop anxiety and PTSD, especially with paramedics as a good example, because they are the first line who see disasters happening and trying to save lives and stuff like that. And when they suffer and struggle from PTSD and they go on disability, now at what point would we recommend that maybe you should find a different kind of a job?
Yeah, I think those have to be frank discussions. I think maybe you should find a different job shouldn't be the first one that we jump to. We always want to go with the idea that let's give them a chance, right? and that's exactly it, is we need to go into these conversations with the mindset that we are helping this person get better. They are not disabled forever. They're not going to be sick forever. In fact, we know lots of people who, get a mental illness, whether it's work-related or not. We know they can come back, and from what they've learned, they become better clinicians, they become, better colleagues. So go into these conversations or these situations with that, we're going to help this person get better. And then if it does get to those, major turning points, it's having the conversation with the person. Nobody wants to have their life planned out for them. So it's connecting with those people and maybe asking the question. If they've undergone a course of treatment and they've stabilized to the point where they can have a serious conversation like that, it's asking them, like, have you ever thought of switching? Or do you have skills that you think you could translate to somewhere else where you feel like you're in a place to handle that right now? And in fact, one of the questions we ask on the mental health check-in is we just ask people to consider, like, if you weren't working as a paramedic, are there things you've thought of you might do? Because you kind of want to give people an escape hatch in their brain. You never want them to feel like they're stuck in the profession they're at or in the organization they're at. So again, it's okay to have them think about what they might what they might do if they're not with that organization or in that profession. It's a little bit timing with that conversation, though. Thank you. You're welcome.
So I have a comment more than, I guess, a question. So my name is Barbara Gobus, and I lead the integration of pharmacists in PCNs around the province. So we have about 85 people on our team. I'd like to propose that people think about referring to the term soft skills as power skills.
Love it.
Because in my experience and my interactions with people, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And the power is in how you say it. And these are not soft at all.
Mm-mm.
They are incredibly powerful. So I'd like to put that out just for people to consider changing the way you think about it as a power skill, not a soft skill.
Thank you. I think that means so much. And you help me reframe even how I think about it, because when I talk to people about having these tough discussions, I call them tough discussions. I tell them to lean into it. I tell them to know you might have to pep talk yourself to go into these conversations. So thank you for pointing that out.
Hi, is it on? I have a question for you in terms of the mental health check-in.
Yeah.
Would you have like a bunch of, a list of questions that you can share with us? What goes on in there?
So I can give you a couple of the examples. We're not sharing the whole thing because we want it to just we want to catch people a little bit off guard. We want them to reflect. So we're not handing out all the questions. But for example, we talk about resources. So we ask somebody, what is an encouraging phrase that you tell yourself when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed? So again, you want them to think of this stuff before they're experiencing the stress. Then it becomes, a game plan for on a stress day. We ask them to name somebody who they could call day or night if they were in crisis. Again, who are your people? Think about them before you need them, and then they get embedded. We also ask them to reflect on their experiences that they've had so far so that they can appreciate they've learned things along the way, even in those moments when they might feel overwhelmed. So we ask, is there something you've learned from a situation that can help you go forward? And like I mentioned earlier too, we ask them to think about their thoughts for the future. So if you were to pick one thing you would like to improve or develop in the next year, what would it be? If you weren't able to continue your work as a paramedic, either by choice or because of other factors, what would you consider doing? Again, giving that escape hatch and making expectations more fair for people. Just a couple examples.
So I apologize if I missed it. Are you doing these mental health check-ins like as a regular occurrence, like as a regular sort of, because one of the things I've grappled with, so I'm a former emerge nurse that now is an emerge nurse manager, is how we can normalize sort of that monthly cafe check-in that allows people to be able to, escape some of the stuff that just builds up, right? And so are you making this like a normal sort of occurrence, or?
So right now we're rolling out a pilot project. We're targeting specifically paramedics who've been with the organization for between 6 months and 2 years. Part of that's because we want them to have enough experience to reflect on so far and kind of have a taste for the job or the organization before they go forward. Ideally, I could see this being like a once a year thing, just because it is, we're dedicating an hour to each person who participates. I think there's still value in having those like maybe once a month meetings where there's like those little debriefs, and sometimes I hesitate with the word debrief because it can have specific connotations, but to have those like little sit downs. So again, I think this stuff could be adapted to fit your team. If you wanted to do, little mental health check-ins where you bring one of the questions and make that a discussion point, or make it part of a check-in individually with staff.
Thank you so much, Katrina. We have our third presentation, psychological PPE during COVID-19.
Oh, so this is the clicker. I think so. Okay. Cool. All right. All right, here we go. So thanks for having us today. We're super excited to be here in person. And we're also very excited to share, hold on, let me make sure this works first, there we go. The Patient Stories Project, the psychological PPE during COVID-19. and excited to share our preliminary data about our research study on the patient's experience with those who shared their story. I also use paper notes. Oops. Did I go twice?
So before we dive in, we'd like to acknowledge that this presentation is happening today on the traditional unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We would like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to the original stewards of this land upon we now which live, learn, work, and play. Before we go further, we'd like to share that we have declare we have no disclosures.
All right. So my name is Lara Gurney. I'm Yugoslavian on my mother's side and English settler on my father's side. I am a daughter, aunt, sister, friend, colleague, cat mom, new COVID golfer. I'm currently working with at Vancouver Coastal Health with the patient experience team. My professional background includes 18 years of emergency and ICU nursing, and a variety of leadership roles in those various units. I was also the head nurse educator in the emergency department throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, which also included a redeployment to the ICU to help with the provincial response, which actually, when I was reflecting, was 1 year ago today that I was pulled up into the ICU.
My name is Vincci. I was born in Hong Kong, and I am a settler on these lands. I'm a daughter, sister, aunt, friend, colleague, also a cat mom to 2 cats, and a registered nurse. I'm currently part of the Health Services for Community Living program at Vancouver Coastal. My team supports people with developmental disabilities, their families, and caregivers. In my previous work lives, I've also been a nurse case manager on the assisted living team during the first few waves of the pandemic, a community health nurse, and an acute medicine nurse at VGH. I'm also a grad student in the UBC's Master of Health Administration program. Since I started my program in September 2020, the joke goes, we are the COVID cohort. 2/3 of our program has been online. I have to admit, I've adjusted to Zoom classes and Zoom presentations, so it was a total shift to remind myself to show up in person today and not in PJ pants. And now over to Lara.
All right. So I want to start by saying I'm absolutely thrilled to be presenting on the Patient Stories Project to you guys here today. This is my 3rd time here presenting on this topic. From a grassroots initiative in the ICU to a research study where I looked at the impact on the staff to where we are now, a pivot for COVID-19, and also understanding the patient's experience with sharing their stories. At the heart of this project is relationships and nurturing the culture of caring and compassion, the reason we're all here to begin with. I will start this presentation with a little bit of background on the Patient Stories Project. So in my journey as a nurse, I've been personally affected by burnout. I struggled with the moral distress in the emergency department of not being able to have the time or space to be able to provide the care that I valued. This led to me leaving the emergency department and starting my journey up in the ICU. And in the ICU, I quickly learned that this is a shared experience across the healthcare profession. It just looked a little bit different. It wasn't so much the busyness that impacted us. It was the provision of providing futile care, and were we even doing what the patient and family even wanted? So recognizing this was a common experience among the nurses and staff, I started the Patient Stories Project to impact staff well-being and to improve the quality of care provided. And it was clear right from the beginning when patients voluntarily came back to the unit to say thank you and look at the team and shake their hands and give them a high five for their care, that there was really something special about that. The staff gathered to the patient and with their family, who was often with them, and upon seeing and hearing from them, the vibe in the unit changed. The staff were uplifted and engaged, and they were so curious to hear about the care that they provided made a difference. So building on this, I created a modality to allow patients and families to share their story for those who cared for them. I wanted to grow this project further and allow patients and families to share their stories with those who cared for them. So I began my journey to grad school and conducted a research study. And what I learned was that sharing stories has the impact and the capacity to influence a positive healthcare culture and improve patient safety. This slide shows the original Patient Stories project up in the hallway of the ICU. So pictured here now is 2022, the invitation flyer for the Patient Stories project. So we are actively building and weaving patient stories into the culture at VCH. We need to continue this work and weave experience into all the key drivers that humanize healthcare. We are taking a proactive approach to create meaningful resolutions for patients, families, and caregivers. And this initiative is foregrounded in a culture of caring and taps into the collective energy of all staff members. So as COVID-19 overwhelmed the healthcare system and burnout threatened the well-being of those who worked at VCH, I pivoted the Patient Stories project to include the COVID-19 population specifically. So we reached out to the emergency department, the ICU, the medicine units that were taking care of all the COVID patients, and the post-COVID recovery clinics. And here's an example of how the stories are formatted and now shared with the units. So either hand deliver the poster that you see over there to the staff within the units, or we send an email with the PDF to the staff where they can there disseminate the posters how they see fit. So in March 2022, I decided to conduct another research study. That's fun. And with some of my researchers at UBC, partnering in with Vincci and members of an amazing patient experience team that I work with now, we flipped the lens and we're looking at the patients and families, and we want to understand why some people choose to share their story and how they could benefit from that. So we interviewed 6 patients in 1-hour-long Zoom interviews, and currently we have the data all themed, which Vincci will share with you guys, and we are just validating it with our patient partners who are also part of our research study. So I'm going to hand it over to Vincci now to talk about a bit of the data.
Thank you, Lara. Okay. So during our thematic analysis, we found 6 major themes. I'm going to apologize in advance. We submitted these slides 2 weeks ago, and we've kind of moved the order of the themes to a more intuitive, logical order since. So I'm just going to click through and let them all appear, and then I'll talk through them. Alrighty, so our first theme is not ready, no pun intended. So we were curious to understand why the majority of care recipients don't share their story, and what better place to go than to ask the people who did choose to share their story. Our participants' insights were that perhaps people were still coping with their losses, still coping with their trauma. They might avoid storytelling because they want to avoid reliving their illness experience, or people simply might have not gained enough physical or emotional strength yet to be able to share their story. Our second theme is sense-making. Participants were sharing their COVID-19 lived experience with other people in order to make sense for themselves of what happened to them, and also to help others understand what happened to them. In effect, participants were processing what happened to them every time they told their story, and were working on weaving this experience with their overall life experience. Participants were also seeking to let others better understand the implications or the seriousness of COVID-19. They did point out that info shared by them as people with lived experience was more credible and more believable than information shared by experts. Our third theme is expressing and showing gratitude. All our participants were sharing expressions of thankfulness, gratitude, and just generally being grateful for the care they received from their healthcare providers and for the support received from their family members. Our fourth theme is closing the loop. So participants were hoping to bridge the informational and the emotional gaps between themselves and their experience and healthcare providers with the aim of improving the care for future patients. Many participants voiced that they saw value in having a formal feedback process in place after discharge from an acute care setting, and that such a process could be a routine part of anyone's journey through the healthcare system. Our fifth theme is new normal. So this describes participants acknowledging that they are going to have to live with current limitations in their abilities for an indeterminate period of time, learning to accept a new baseline. Many participants also shared how they and their loved ones have been flexible, supportive, and accommodating of their current levels of ability. Our sixth theme is taking control. This describes participants reaching a point where either they had returned to their previous functional baseline or they had come to a point to accept their new functional baseline and were moving along with their lives. And here we have some exemplar quotes which validate our themes. I'll just give you all a few moments to read them. Hope that was enough time for you all. So going beyond pots and pans, in our literature findings, we did confirm that gratitude can buffer against burnout. Expressed gratitude actually benefits both the expressor and the receiver. The expressor experiences increased life satisfaction and sense of well-being over time. The receiver of gratitude experiences increased social worth and is stimulated to demonstrate more helping behaviors. There's actually a significant association between perceived quality of care from patients and perceived quality of work life from healthcare workers on the same ward. In other words, healthcare workers' physical and emotional health is inextricably tied to patient outcomes. Therefore, organizations should consider policies which promote increased appreciation to healthcare workers and initiatives which promote a culture of interpersonal gratitude. In summary, a circular process like the Patient Stories Project can help patients and families find closure and be a source of learning and motivation for healthcare teams. Everybody recovers at their own pace, and it cannot be underscored enough that we need to help people set realistic, individualized, and flexible goals. It goes without saying that we all need to listen and support people in our lives, both in our work and personal lives, who are going through their own recovery journey right now. Every story is unique, holds potential and value. We need to offer people the chance to share their story, and it is up to people to decide if they want to share, when they want to share, and how much they want to share. In conclusion, the Patient Stories Project is a meaningful, cost-effective intervention which represents the act of healing together to emerge stronger for staff, patients, and families. We encourage all teams to utilize the Patient Stories Project Toolkit, which you can find on the VCH intranet, to kick off the Patient Stories Project in your clinical area. Thank you so much for listening, and we welcome any questions.
Hi, thank you so much. That was a really, really great presentation. My name is Leona. I work for First Nations Health Authority as a regional nurse manager. I'm also from Ihaddisut First Nation on Vancouver Island, and I've been a nurse for quite a long time. A lot of the stuff you're talking about has to do with, when you talked about relational practice, I think that should be the key thing that is taught to any person who works with members of the public who come into a healthcare system. And, storytelling, that's very traditional for my culture, to storytell and listen. Listen is, I find, a hard thing for patient care providers to do. One, because they're so rushed, and two, because they may not be interested. And if people could just sit and listen and give that person even one solid minute of listening and actually saying, yes, I hear you, things would go a lot easier. And I tell that to new nurses that we hire. The listening process is so hard for primary, and I had to learn it working for First Nations community when I first started out. Just sit and listen makes a huge difference. And to thank the person in front of you for trusting them with the healthcare you're about to provide them, because it goes both ways, right? Not only are you thanking them, but not only are they thanking you, but you should be thanking the community and the people you're working with and for, that they trust you to give you that care. And a lot of that can really, when we talk about in plain sight, missing and murdered Indigenous women, the truth and reconciliation, none of that happens. That's why we pay all this money for these big reports. But where are we going? Where are we going with anti-racist behavior? Not just with Indigenous people, all people. We live in a very multicultural city and BC, and rural and remote. Where are they in this picture? So I think I'd like to see your patient stories go beyond into rural and remote communities and really dig into that. Thank you.
I do have a comment. Thank you for sharing that, and I think you'd be very excited to hear where we are in our next phase as well. So with the COVID clinics now, the next phase with me joining the patient experience team is try and take this all to Vancouver Coastal Health, recognizing our partnership with Indigenous patient experience and the in plain sight report, especially coming from an emergency nurse side lens as myself. We have actually partnered with Indigenous Health, and we're building the patient stories partnership together with the patient experience team. So we're hoping that we can share how that partnership has, we've collaborated to tap into the expertise and the rooted culture of storytelling in Indigenous health to grow this project, to what you're saying with relationships. Yeah, well.
We're coming to the close of our session today, and I just want to take a moment and give a hand to all of our presenters and their wonderful stories, their projects. We can give them another round of applause. So just a little bit of logistics. You should see an evaluation form on your chair if you would take an opportunity to give us some feedback on the presentations and the sessions so far. Just to kind of guide you to where the presentation 1, presentation 2, and 3, these were the presentations that you heard today. I'd also just like to take a moment to thank our support folks at the back, including our technical folks. I was really happy to see that we had some really great technical and facilitative support today, so we can give them a round of applause as well. And so where we are headed next, if you want to head up to our lunch, I believe it's lunchtime. Correct me if I'm wrong. Perfect. To our lunch ballroom where you can grab lunch at your table. And I also wanted to just take a moment and acknowledge our live stream folks as well. Thank you for joining us. Have a great afternoon and have a great rest of your conference. Thank you.